Hey everybody, welcome back to my build of the Voron 0.2 kit from LDO. We are actually going to start the build today, but this is not the first episode in this series. So if you're just joining us now, there was an introductory episode where I talked about kind of my plan for this printer and the kind of an overview of the documentation and some of the steps that I prepared ahead of time. So if you're interested in going back and watching that, I will drop a link to the playlist up in a card in the top right corner here so that you can see the whole playlist. And this is the second episode, but if you're watching this in the future, there will be additional ones coming along with more of the build. So with that said, let's get started with what we have on tap for today. I'm going to put the Voron, the official Voron instruction manual up there in the top right corner of the screen when it makes sense to do so. I don't want to block the screen all the time, but this way you can keep up with where we are in the process. Like I said, we're kind of starting a few pages into the manual. This is actually page 16 because I did some prep ahead of time. So we're going to be working on starting to build the frame today. And I've done some prep work, so as we get to each step, I'll let you know kind of what I've already done ahead of time. This page, the LDO build notes for this kit say that we can skip this because there are, with the standard Voron kit or Voron build, there are these 3D printed bars that you're supposed to insert hex nuts into to hold your linear rails in place. The LDO kit came with these nice metal ones instead. So we're skipping this page and we're moving on to the linear rails themselves. Again, our kit came with 5 of these linear rails as is needed for this printer. 4 of them are the same. They look like this. For me, the 5th linear rail is different. It's a high wind rail. It theoretically has a little bit tighter tolerances on the carriage here so that it's less likely to wobble, although these seem fine as well. So if your kit comes with one rail that's different, that's the one that you're supposed to use for the x-axis. So we're using the other 4 here for our y and z, and then we'll use the x-axis one in the future. This page of the manual talks about how to clean and grease your rails, and LDO had also in their instructions a nice guide that you can follow for that as well. So I'll link that down in the description of this video if you're interested and you're following along on your own. So with these next several pages, and I'll show you these real quick before we get started, the idea is to insert one of these into an extrusion and then tighten it down, and it gives us some specific dimensions. Like here it says 38 millimeters from the end is where we're supposed to position that rail. And we use these little 3D printed guides as well to hold the thing in place. So I'm going to hide these instructions so that we can see everything that's going on here, and then I will go ahead and do this. So the other step that I did in preparation is I went through and I labeled, I don't know if you can see, the marker I used is almost the same color as this masking tape, but I labeled the extrusions I think it's A through J. In the beginning of the instructions, they show you how to identify, and they want you to label the extrusions because they're all the same length, but they have different holes drilled in different spots so that you'll be able to access screws later on. So it's important to use the correct rails here, and what we're going to do is go ahead and grab these 2 E extrusions, and with the hole here facing upward, we'll go ahead and slide this in. These little bars as well, they have a flat side and a more rounded side, so I'm putting these in with the flat side facing up so that it'll kind of clamp against the extrusion. I think that's probably the better orientation in this case. And I'm going to remove, but not, you know what, I'll just move these over, these little stoppers here. You want to make sure that your carriage doesn't slide off your linear rail while you're working on things, because the little ball bearings will all fall out and you'll be sad. So it's best to keep those stoppers on the rail for as long as you possibly can. And at some point during the assembly, we will have put things up against the ends of the rail, and then we won't have that issue anymore, and we can take these little plastic stoppers off. So what I'm doing here is just tightening this kind of loosely down. We want it to be able to move around so that we can get it lined up and centered in the next step. We're also not using every single screw hole in this rail because in these things aren't holes that line up with every screw hole, and even in the Voron instruction manual they suggest that you do every other screw hole. Alright, cool. So these two little spacers can go on either end, and they sit down nicely flush against the linear or the extrusion, and then they will hold the linear rail centered, which is what we want. And then the instructions suggested that we have this on the end with the hole, which is this end here. They want it to be 38 millimeters. So you could use a ruler, and the LDO kit actually comes with a pretty nice little metal metric ruler. But what I'm going to do instead is use my digital calipers here. As long as the battery holds out. It looks like the battery is getting a little bit low on these things, but we'll get it very close to 38, and then we will measure from the end here. That seems good. Make sure that our guides here are centering our rail, and then we're going to tighten the screws from the innermost one, kind of the middle there, toward the outer edge, and tighten them down nice and snug, because we don't want this linear rail moving around. Alright, there we go. And before we do the second one, I am leaving the masking tape with these labels for the rails, or for the extrusions on here, at least for now. At some point we'll take it off, but I don't want to mix them up still. So before we do the second one, right, because there is repetitive building here, we'll go ahead and go one forward, and we'll see that they want us to put one of these little end stops on this end down here, opposite where we measured the 38 millimeters. So this goes right on here, and the way that works, and it goes with a M3x8, which is this size here. Yeah. So what we're going to do is just start this nut, and then we should be able to just slide it down, yeah, into the extrusion like that. We want this flush with the end of the rail, and then we will tighten this down. All of the tools, by the way, that I'm using, at least so far on the build, except for the digital calipers, all the rest of these tools came with the LDO kit. So I've chosen to use their little hex nuts and hex drivers that came with the kit, at least for now. I have my own, but I'm curious how these will hold up. So we're going to use those, and then at some point I might decide to switch over to my own at some point, but we'll see. At this point we can take this end stop off, because this is now stopping our carriage from falling off on that side. And with that done, let's go ahead and do the second one as well. So again, sliding this in with the flat side facing upward. We'll grab one of our rails. We'll move these little end stops over by one, because we're not screwing through these two holes here. Yeah, that seems good. Alright, then we get our centering guides, plop them on there like so, and I've still got this caliper set at the 38 millimeters we needed for this end. Let's make sure that this is the end with our hole. It is. Alright, that looks good. So again, tighten down from the center of the rail out towards the edges. Very good. And then our stopper, if I could get this nut threaded in place, there we go. Our stopper slides on like so. And then this can come off and has disappeared onto the floor. Nice. All right, very good. So I think we set these aside for the moment. Yes, and we move on to working on the two extrusions that will be the Z axis. So this shows these two extrusions are going to be the vertical ones that are mounted on the back of the printer. And again, they need to have two of these linear rails on them, and they are the ones labeled C. So I will grab these, my C extrusions, and just looking quickly through the instructions, we still have the same thing with, we're going to put one of those bars in there, screw the linear rail down, we're going to use the guides to center it, and in this case, we are going to measure 33 millimeters from one of these ends that has the hole in it. So like this will be the top of these extrusions. And so we'll measure 33 millimeters down, and then we'll tighten it down from there. So let's get that started. All right. So we need our centering guides, and consulting the instructions again, it said 33 millimeters. Re-zero this thing just in case. Yeah, it's fine. So we're going 33, 32.98. Close enough. All right. That seems good. Again, making sure that, as the instructions say, there's a hole in this, drilled through this extrusion right there. So that's good. And now we can tighten it down. All right, very nice. Now, I believe, yes, we do need, again, one of these end stops on one end, and it's on this end where we measured the 33 millimeters, so this one goes over here. And we will go ahead and put that on now. And then we can take off this little stopper. Just making sure we're getting smooth motion here. Actually, I feel like maybe I got some debris in that as I was moving it around and or screwing it down. Maybe it'll work its way out. Yeah, that's not bad. Okay. I was a little concerned there that I was going to have to take that off and re-grease it, but it's okay. Yeah. All right. Good. And the final one here. There was a little bit of grease that came out of the carriage on that last linear rail when I was moving it around there. And that grease has now gotten on my fingers and is causing me to drop the screwdriver. It's all right. We will push through, don't worry. All right. So that one's good, and we need our centering guides, and we need our 33 millimeters from the end. There we are. And then we can tighten this one down. Nice. And we need our end stop. Again, goes on this end. I didn't double check when I was measuring and placing this one to make sure that the hole is on the correct side, but it is. So we are good. Details like that are super important to be careful of while you're in these early steps of the build, right? Because you can easily get something oriented incorrectly or placed in the wrong spot, and then you won't realize it until quite a lot later on, and then you'll have to disassemble a lot of stuff. So try to be extra careful as you're going through. All right, next in the instructions, on page 27 now. So these two here are the Z-axis, these two up here are the Y-axis. And so next in the instructions we have these B extrusions, which do not have any drilled holes anywhere in them, but they do have the tapped holes in the ends for some screws. And we also on this page of the instructions get to the first time where we're preloading some M3 nuts. And so I wanted to talk about that real quick because they mention in the LDO kit, and actually I think they do in the Voron documentation as well. Let's see. Maybe it was earlier on a page that we didn't look at, but they do have a page where they talk about this no-drop nut mod. And so let me get you a closer up view of this thing, right? So this is a little 3D printed part that you can insert a regular M3 hex nut into. The idea here is there are a lot of places throughout this build that you're going to need to slide an M3 nut into an extrusion like so. And they have you preload a lot of them because it's impossible once we close up the ends of the extrusions to then be able to slide these nuts in. And we're going to need them in the future to attach, you know, everything, right? Panels and clips and other things that attach to these extrusions. And so you have to preload them. If you want to, you can just slide the nut in there, but they'll be rattling around. They won't fall out. But the whole time that you're doing the rest of your build, every time you tilt these extrusions, the nuts will slide one way or the other. So these little printed parts help to hold them in place. The issue that I had, the LDO plates that I pre-printed, you know, the pre-printed plates that we talked about in the last episode, had a whole plate of just these no drop nut pieces. And so I had printed, you know, literally like probably 100 of these things. And when I went to insert those into the extrusion for the first time, it was way too tight of a fit. Like I could force it in there, but then once it was in here, it was nearly impossible to slide it along. And even this version here that I've reprinted, it's fairly tight to slide. Like I can use a tool and I can slide it and that's fine. And I'm happy with sort of that amount of tightness. But the first version of these that I printed were just slightly too big. And maybe that was my printer or maybe it was the version of the parts that LDO provided. What I did was I went back and grabbed the original no drop nut mod STLs from the repository. Again, I'll link that down in the description like I do with just about any resource I mention in these builds. I'll link in the description so that you can go find it. I went and downloaded the original STLs. I test printed those. They were still slightly too big, so I ended up on my printer scaling these down on the X and Y axis, so on this dimension and this dimension, to 99% of their original size, so just 1% smaller. And then in the Z dimension, which is this height that kind of fits inside of the extrusion, I went to 95% of the original size and did a test print at that size, and it fits really nicely. So I've printed the rest of these and fit all of those nuts into these here, and we'll be using them throughout the build as well at that smaller size. So hopefully everything will work out nicely. Now in the instructions, and I'll just show this one time, and then every time we preload nuts, it'll be the same story. They show, here they show those 4 M3x6 screws going into the extrusion, and those need nuts in place. They don't specifically call out those nuts. They only call out the extra ones that you need to load. So this first extrusion here, because it needs the 2 screws, we're going to put 2 of these in there, even though the instructions don't specifically say that. And then the second of these extrusions, they want 2 extra ones. So we'll use the 2 that we need for the screws plus 2 more. So it'll be 4 total in this extrusion down here. I hope that makes sense. All right, so let's go ahead and thread 1 in this side, 1 in this side, and we'll go ahead and pull these to somewhere around here, I think, is probably about where they're going to need to go. And we're going to thread 2 M3x6s in here. The idea with these screws is you don't want to tighten them all the way down, right? Because they're not really connected to anything yet. We're going to use these and the screws that we're about to thread into the ends of these extrusions as well. They're going to hold the extrusions to one another to create our frame. So what I mean by that is, if we look at it from the side, right, you want to have enough of a gap still there. You don't want to tighten it down all the way, such that we can take another extrusion and we can slide it up through there like that. And then there will be a hole from here that we can reach into with our driver and tighten that down to square everything up. So that's the way that works. As I mentioned earlier, on this extrusion here, it calls for 2 in the middle, in between the 2 that are going to have the screws in them. So we'll go ahead and feed 2 in like so. It was a bit of a fiddly process, I must say, fitting all of these hex nuts into these pieces. And I had done that for all the ones that were printed at the wrong size. So I had to then take them all out and redo it once I printed them at the smaller size. Yeah, so maybe if you're doing this build, you might want to check, like print some samples and check that before you go to the trouble of inserting all of those in there, just to make sure that they're going to fit within your extrusions. And I don't know if it's my printer or the filament I was using, or if these extrusions, because of the like the powder coated exterior they have on them, if that's adding a little bit of extra size to them such that things aren't fitting correctly. But in either case, probably want to double check and make sure that everything's fitting, which again is part of the reason why I wanted to go through and kind of test fit everything before I started the official build. All right, so here we go. We've got these 4 screws and then the 2 extra ones in between, which is what the instructions are wanting. And then we are now going to start assembling by putting the 2 Z-axis pieces, which are these right here, onto this extrusion, right? So this one with the extra 2 nuts is going to be the bottom. So these go like so, and then this one is going to be the top. And so these will slide on like this. And then we'll tighten everything down, but not fully tight yet, because we then are going to have to square everything up. However, it's always good to look ahead in the instructions because, and actually it says here, read the next 4 pages before continuing. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to make sure that the extra 2 nuts are down here. And they also want us to preload 3 of the nuts on the back side of these 2 Z-axis extrusions. And then slide the top on and then tighten everything loosely, not super tight. And so that's what we're going to do now. So I'm going to take these away for a second so that we can preload these nuts in the back side. It says 3 on each side. I don't know where along the vertical height of this thing that these need to go. So I'm just going to load them somewhere near the middle for now. And I'm sure we'll be able to slide them up and down later on to get them to where we need them to be. So there's one side. This is our other Z-axis, correct? Yes. All right. So now with that, we can slide these here and here. And then I believe this is the size we need. I'm going to make it tight enough for now that these extrusions won't fall apart from one another, because I believe I'm probably going to need to pick this thing up and tilt it up vertically to make sure that it's square. So I don't want it falling apart, but also it's definitely not as, we don't want to tighten it all the way down yet, as tight as it needs to be. So, all right, I just realized that back a couple of steps ago, right there were these 4 M3x10s that we were supposed to put in the ends of, both ends of these 2B extrusions. And so I'm going to go back and do that now because we're about to need them, I believe. The other thing I'm going to do with these, all of these ones that thread into the ends of extrusions, I'm going to go ahead and put just a little bit of Loctite on these screws because I want to make sure when this is finished and we get everything tightened down as much as we want, that we're not going to have any sort of play in our frame at all. So I'm just going to put a small drop on each of these before I go and thread them into the ends of these extrusions here. And again, not tightening them down all the way, leaving enough of a gap that I can slide an extrusion over the top, because I believe that is what we're going to do next. One note about thread locker like this, and it is called for in a few parts in the official Voron instructions later on, and I think they mention it there when you first are supposed to use it. As I drop screws, the thread locker, most thread locker chemistry is such that it can eat away at ABS plastic. So if you're using ABS printed parts for your printer build, as you probably should be, ABS or ASA, you want to make sure that you don't accidentally put a lot of thread locker in a place where it's going to be touching those plastic parts. So just something to be aware of and careful about. All right, and with that caught up to the step that we were supposed to have done earlier, we should now be able to go forward to this page 32, where they want us to take these H extrusions. So I've got them here, and these are not, this is not their final location on the build, but they're going to be used temporarily here to help us square all of this up. Right, because we need something on the ends here to square this up. So what they want us to do, and this is where we're going to need to, so we'll have a little discussion and I'll do some, I'll show you what I'm going to do, but the final squaring of this gantry, as I did with my big Voron when I built it, I don't feel good about doing that here on my build desk, because this wooden desk and the mat that I have on top of it to protect it are not necessarily perfectly flat, right? So what they recommend in the Voron documentation, and what I recommend as well, is to find a super flat surface, something like a slab of granite or a big piece of glass or something like that, that you know is very flat, so that as you press things down and try to square this up, there aren't little, you know, bits of not perfectly flat on your surface that are causing issues. So what I'm going to do is use the granite countertops in my kitchen, because that's the best thing that I have around my house, and I can't really film very easily in there. So I'm going to show you the process here on this desk with the cameras, and then I'm going to take the whole thing into my kitchen and finish up the squaring process there and tighten everything down. So what they want us to do in the instructions is to loosely tighten those down like I just did, and then we're going to take a couple of measurements from the outsides to make sure that these are positioned correct left to right, these vertical extrusions, and then we are going to need to measure, or try to get a machinist square is what I have, so I'm going to use that to square up the insides of these to 90 degrees. So let's begin by ever so slightly loosening all of these 4 bolts. Right, so that we can now slide these side to side like so. And they want 58 millimeters. So again, I'll zero my calipers and come out here to 58. All right, And then we're measuring in from the inside of this extrusion here. So we're coming in from there, a little more. That seems just about right. I'm going to retighten this down just a touch. Being very precise with these measurements, and also when you're going to square everything up, is very important to make sure that your axes are perfectly parallel as best as they can be, and that everything is spaced correctly. And it will affect the precision of your prints. And again, since we're going for precision here with this printer above all else, that really incentivizes me to pay extra careful attention here. All right, so I'm gonna go grab my machinist square. I'll be right back. All right, so here's our square, and we can, one at a time, with these corners, loosen that just a touch. Let's loosen all four just a touch, just so that we have a little bit of play here. And then we can square that up like so. And again, you want to be doing this with the surface underneath being perfectly flat, because then you're sure that it's square in the other axis as well. And that's what I'm missing here, since I'm not confident that my surface is perfectly square or perfectly flat. Because if I'm putting pressure down and I'm putting pressure against this square, then I can be fairly confident that this is square in all directions, if that makes sense. So this is the process that you need to go through, but again, I will do it here, and then I'm going to actually loosen this up and go do it again on a surface that I know is very flat. So at this point we have this. There is one more step of the instructions that shows us that we can put one more of these little end stops just on the right-hand side of the bottom of the z-axis here. The reason, I think, that we don't have, and I don't need a no-drop nut plastic piece in this nut. The reason that we don't have one on this side is that, as far as I know, the Z end stop is going to go down there, and so that piece will sit at the bottom of that linear rail and prevent that carriage from coming off down there. But we don't install that until later on. So this just gets this on this one side only, and then we can remove this little stopper here, but we'll leave the one over here so that the carriage doesn't come off down there. All right, that seems good. And with this, I think these pieces of masking tape that I had labeling these extrusions can now come off, because we know which ones they are. We'll leave the ones on the H extrusions because those aren't in their final location. Those actually come off later on when we go to put some other parts of the frame together. So here is our squared. Yeah, and it does wobble like a little bit from side to side here, so I can tell it's not perfectly square. So again, this is the case where I'm going to need to loosen these up a bit, and then on a very flat surface be pressing down while retightening to make sure that you want to make sure there's no wobble at all. Like, I don't know if the camera's picking that up, but there's a definite amount of wobble from one side to the other if I like press down on this corner and then this corner. We want to eliminate that. So I will go do that on my kitchen counter, and then the next step here is the beginnings of building the holder for the bed. The LDO kit that I have came with the Kirigami bed mod, and so we get to skip like this page here in the instructions and the next 10 or so, and we're going to be using the Kirigami bed assembly guide instead. And so I think we'll do that in the next episode. So we'll stop here for now. I will go and square this, and I'll go ahead and release this video as well so that you guys can be following along while I'm building. So yeah, this is not like pre-recorded and then I'm editing it later and the whole thing is already built. What you're seeing right now is what I've done today, like the day the video comes out. So if you have comments or questions or want to follow along and give feedback as I'm building, please feel free to do so down in the comments. I'll read the comments each day, and if you have specific questions, we can try to answer those in the next section of the build, which hopefully will be tomorrow. The plan is to have these be daily little short spurts of build, just because that's what I have, that's the time I have available with my schedule. And we'll see how that goes. We'll see if I'm able to keep up with a daily upload schedule with this build series. There may be a day off here and there based on my schedule and my availability to work on this. But there, we're off to a start. We have the beginnings of a frame. We have these Z-axis parts, and then these Y-axis bits are going to go up here later on both sides to be our Y-axis. They are not ready to install just yet. This needs to be squared first, and we need to build the bed carriage as well. So that'll be what we work on next time. I will see you then. Like I said, if you have questions or comments, leave them down below, and I'll try to read those all before the next episode so that we can cover anything that you guys are concerned about, or if I've done something that you don't agree with or that is wrong or that you want me to look at, let me know that as well. I'll see you in the next one. Have a good day.